You've spent 20 years playing by the rules, stacking digits in a bank account that you were told represented your future, your status, and your security. But imagine standing at a bakery counter and watching the price of bread rise by 2 billion marks in the seconds it took you to reach the front of the line, realizing in that heartbeat that your entire life of work has been mathematically erased. This is the nominal illusion, the dangerous belief that money is value, rather than a fragile claim on energy and labor that can be revoked the moment a system goes insolvent. Wealth does not simply disappear during a collapse. It undergoes a violent, silent restructuring, migrating from the abstract world of numbers into the concrete world of physical utility. While the masses wait for an official announcement to save their savings, the hierarchy of assets is already dictating who eats and who starves. This is not a history lesson. It is a forensic demonstration of the permanent mechanism that governs your survival when the screen goes dark and the promises written on paper finally turn into ghosts. The tragedy of Elias is often dismissed as a freak occurrence of history or a failure of a specific government. But the math of the abyss suggests otherwise. What Elias experienced was not a random chaos, but a violent restructuring. Most people view a currency collapse as the total disappearance of wealth. This is the first layer of the nominal illusion. Value does not vanish into the air. It migrates. It flows from the abstract to the concrete through specific structural conduits. This is the hidden mechanism of asset hierarchy. Think about what that means. The official narrative defines inflation as a general rise in prices caused by an imbalance in supply and demand. This explanation is technically accurate but functionally useless for survival. It treats the phenomenon as a natural disaster, like a flood or an earthquake. In reality, a currency collapse is an administrative act of insolvency. It is the moment when the issuer of a currency admits they can no longer fulfill the promises written on their paper. When the state or the market revokes your claim on energy and labor, the nominal value of your savings becomes a ghost. But the energy and the labor still exist. They simply belong to someone else. When a system breaks, it deletes 4 things simultaneously: your purchasing power, your social standing, your future security, and your faith in the contract. To understand how to survive this migration, we must look past the numbers on the screen and identify the assets that provide systemic leverage. We are not talking about speculation. We are talking about the cold utility of things that are either geographically anchored, physiologically necessary, or mathematically finite. History shows a consistent pattern across 180 currency collapses since the year 1700. The average life expectancy of a fiat currency is 27 years. We will examine 5 specific asset classes that have historically ignored the collapse of banks and the death of nations. We will see how a debt can become a weapon, why a blacksmith can outlive a banker, and how a small piece of metal can buy a ticket out of a war zone. The pattern is already in motion. Let us be precise about the first anchor of real utility. Here is how the land itself dictates the terms of survival. To understand why Elias watched his life work evaporate, you must understand how the currency system actually functions. Most people believe that money is a store of value. This is the first layer of the nominal illusion. Money is not value. It is a claim on value. Think about what that means. Imagine a theater ticket. The ticket has no intrinsic worth. Its power comes from the contract it represents. It is a claim on a seat and a performance. If the theater burns down, or the actors refuse to play, the ticket does not become less valuable. It becomes a piece of paper. This is what economists call monetary debasement, which simply means the issuer of the ticket has printed more claims than there are seats in the hall. Your bank balance is a record of your past labor. You gave your time and your energy to the system, and in return, the system gave you a digital promise. You believed that this promise could be redeemed for food or shelter at any point in the future. But the relationship between a currency and the real world is not a law of physics. It is an administrative arrangement. When a state faces total insolvency, it does not stop operating. It simply begins to rewrite the terms of the contract. It creates new claims to pay for old debts. As the supply of claims expands, each individual claim commands a smaller portion of the available energy and labor. This is the mechanism of the Cantillon effect, which describes how those closest to the source of money creation receive the new currency before the prices rise, while people like Elias receive it last after the purchasing power has already vanished. Wealth does not die during a collapse. It undergoes a violent restructuring. It moves from the abstract world of numbers into the concrete world of physical utility. While the paper marks in Berlin were losing their meaning, the factories they once bought were still standing. The coal in the ground was still there. The labor of the mechanic was still needed. The value did not disappear. It migrated from the bank account of the bookkeeper into the hands of those who held the physical conduits of survival. We have systems in place today like deposit insurance and government regulations that are designed to prevent this kind of absolute erasure. That is true. And we will examine exactly what those protections mean in a modern context. But first, let us look at the most primitive and permanent anchor of real utility. Here is how the land itself dictates the terms of survival when the numbers fail. I promised to show how the land itself dictates the terms of survival, and the data from the 2008 collapse in Zimbabwe provides the empirical proof. In the urban centers of Harare, inflation reached 79 billion% month on month. For the city dweller with no connection to the soil, a $1 trillion note could not buy a single egg. But for the small-scale farmer in the province's value was not a number on a piece of paper. Value was the caloric density of a sack of maize. This is the first law of the hierarchy of utility. When the system fails, the person who owns the means of production eats, while the person who owns the promises starves. Now let us look at the sheer scale of the historical erasure that transformed Elias from a man of status into a ghost of the middle class. In January 1923, $1 was worth 17,972 German marks. By November, that same dollar commanded 4.2 trillion marks. This was not a transition. It was a total liquidation of the social contract. In Hungary in 1946, the math became even more violent. Prices doubled every 15 hours. A retired teacher in Budapest would walk to the store with her monthly pension and find that by the time she reached the front of the queue, her entire life of service was worth less than a single cigarette. Failure was unthinkable until it happened. These are not isolated incidents of bad policy. They are the terminal phase of a recurring structural pattern. Over 180 currencies have met this end since the year 1700. In each case, the population believed their specific system was different. They believed their institutions were too large or too sophisticated to dissolve. Today, we share that same belief. We look at the modern financial system with its deposit insurance and its central bank liquidity swaps, and we feel protected. We believe that we have built a fortress that can withstand the math of the abyss. This architecture of modern regulation is the ultimate safety net. It is the reason the world continues to trust the numbers on the screen. Now you might say that the world of Elias is a relic of a primitive financial era. You might argue that we have moved past the fragility of 1923 Berlin, and that we have since engineered a global architecture of safety. You point to the modern banking system with its deposit insurance and its regulatory oversight. You believe that your $5,000 or $50,000 or $500,000 are not just numbers, but a legal obligation that the state is bound to honor. You are right that the obligation exists, but you are wrong about the capacity of the system to fulfill it during a systemic fracture. This is the second layer of the nominal illusion. Let us look at the forensic mathematics of the safety net. In the United States, The Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation is the primary shield for the public. As of the most recent reporting, the Deposit Insurance Fund maintains a reserve ratio of approximately 1.1% of total insured deposits. This means for every $100 the system promises to protect, there is exactly $1.10 sitting in the fund. This is not a conspiracy. It is a matter of documented balance sheet reality. The insurance is designed to manage friction in a stable system. It is not designed to withstand a structural collapse. Think about what that means. If a systemic event occurs, the fund is mathematically insufficient to cover the claims. At that moment, the state faces a binary choice. It can allow the banks to fail and the deposits to vanish, or it can invoke its power as the sovereign issuer of currency to print the missing 99% of the funds. If they choose the second path, you will receive your numbers. You will see the full balance in your account. But the act of creating that volume of currency out of nothing is the exact mechanism that triggers the migration of value Elias experienced. You will have the dollars, but you will not have the purchasing power. The guarantee is a promise of nominal delivery, not a promise of real utility. This is the hidden paradox of the modern era. The very mechanism designed to protect you is the one that facilitates your liquidation through devaluation. In 1946, Hungary, they had banks and they had laws. In 1923, Germany, they had a central bank and a constitution. None of these institutional structures could stop the math of the abyss once the trust in the contract was severed. The solution we have built is a thin layer of paint over a crumbling wall. It creates the illusion of stability until the first crack appears. Now that we understand why the institutions cannot save the abstract value, we must ask what remains when the paint peels away. We have seen how the system deletes your wealth. Now we must look at the specific tools that the system cannot reach. We have examined the failure of the promise. Let us now examine the cold utility of the physical world. Let us look at the assets that do not require a bank or a government to exist. That was the theory. Here is what happened in practice in Lebanon, beginning in late 2019. This was not a primitive economy. This was a nation known as the Switzerland of the Middle East, a sophisticated banking hub where the middle class felt as secure as Elias did in Berlin. But the math of the abyss does not care about reputation. In a matter of weeks, the Lebanese pound lost over 95% of its value. The banks did not disappear. They remained standing. The lights stayed on. But the numbers on the screens had been decoupled from reality. The system created what locals called the Colla. These were US dollars, trapped inside the banking software. You could see your balance. You could look at the 5 figures or 6 figures you had worked decades to accumulate. But you could not touch them. If you wanted to withdraw your savings, the bank offered you a choice. You could leave the money in the digital void, or you could withdraw it in local currency at a rate that erased 80% of its purchasing power instantly. This was the administrative liquidation of an entire generation. Think about what that means. The plumber who kept his tools and a small plot of olive trees in the mountains continued to trade utility for food. The surgeon who had moved his wealth into physical gold years prior bought a plane ticket and left. But the bookkeepers, the teachers, and the retirees who trusted the institutional promise found themselves standing in lines that stretched around blocks, waiting for an ATM to dispense a handful of paper that lost value during the walk home. Failure was unthinkable until it happened. It happened in 1923. It happened in 1946. And it is happening right now. This is the third point of the pattern. The mechanism is not a historical curiosity. It is a structural constant that remains dormant until the debt load exceeds the system's capacity to lie. When the collapse arrived in Beirut, the speed was devastating. The transition from a stable life to a struggle for caloric survival took less than 48 hours for some. You are not watching a documentary about a distant land. You are watching a forensic demonstration of the vulnerability of your own position. The Lebanese depositor believed in the safety net just as you do. They believed their central bank had the tools to manage the friction. They were wrong. The intervention did come, but it did not save the people. It saved the architecture by sacrificing the depositors. This leads us to the most uncomfortable realization of the modern era. If the state can intervene to save the system, who provides the resource for that salvation? When the numbers are printed to fill the void, who is actually paying the bill? The answer is found in the final layer of the hierarchy, where the most robust assets are hidden from the reach of the printing press. And here is where it gets uncomfortable. There is a pattern that connects the streets of Beirut in 2019 to the study of Elias in 1923. It is the moment when the administrative layer of reality is stripped away to reveal the raw machinery of survival. This is not a conspiracy theory. This is structural analysis of the hierarchy of real utility. To understand why Elias lost everything while his neighbor survived, you must understand that money is not a thing you own. It is a social technology for deferring consumption. It is a promise that your past labor can be traded for the future energy of another person. When you save a currency, you are placing your trust in the ability of the system to maintain the integrity of that promise. But a currency collapse is the moment when the issuer of the promise admits they have sold more claims than there is energy to fulfill them. It is the forced reconciliation of all deferred claims at once. Think about what that means. Most people view their wealth through the lens of nominal convenience. They value the ease of the digital transfer and the liquidity of the bank account. But convenience and safety are not the same thing. They are often opposites. In a stable system, the number on the screen is a functional tool. In a terminal system, that same number is a cage. When the state realizes it cannot pay its debts, it does not stop operating. It begins to rewrite the social contract through administrative liquidation. It imposes capital controls. It freezes withdrawals. It attempts to stop the flow of value by decree. But you cannot freeze a relationship. You cannot impose capital controls on trust. The unifying concept of every collapse is the violent migration of value from the abstract to the concrete. This is the law of the hierarchy of real utility. Value does not vanish. It moves from those who hold claims to those who hold conduits. The hierarchy is simple and brutal. At the base are the claims on others, the bank deposits and the paper promises. These are deleted first because they are the easiest to reproduce. Above them are the productive tools and specialized human capital, the things that require physics and time to create. At the apex are the assets that are mathematically finite and geographically portable. The deepest layer of this mechanism is the realization that the state is not a protector of your value, but its primary competitor. When the printing press begins to run to save the architecture of the banks, it is performing a silent reallocation of your life. It is taking the purchasing power of 20 years of labor and using it to fill the void created by the insolvency of the sovereign. This is why the bookkeeper perishes while the mechanic survives. The bookkeeper held a promise that could be revoked. The mechanic held a utility that could not be ignored. The market is not asking for your permission to reprice your life. It is simply enforcing the physics of necessity. We are witnessing the moment when the nominal illusion dissolves, and the only thing that remains is the cold math of what the world actually needs to function. The hierarchy is being enforced right now. So what does this mean in practice? We have spent this time dismantling the architecture of the nominal promise, which leaves a void. If the bank balance is a ghost, we must identify the bone. History suggests that survival is not found in a single magic asset, but in the strategic distribution of exposure across the hierarchy of real utility. I'm not recommending these paths. I'm documenting that they have happened, and that they provided the only conduits for value migration during previous collapses. The first alternative is the landed anchor. Arable land is the ultimate floor of utility because it converts solar energy into the caloric survival of your family. It is the only asset that literally feeds you when the grocery store shelves are empty. But land has a critical limitation. It is geographically fixed. You cannot put a farm in a suitcase. If the collapse turns into a localized conflict, the land becomes a target for seizure or a cage that prevents you from fleeing. The second alternative is the productive tool or the specialized skill. This is the intangible asset of the surgeon or the mechanic. It is the only wealth the state cannot tax or confiscate through inflation. As long as people need their bodies repaired or their machines functioning, you have a claim on their labor. But this requires your physical health and your presence. A skill cannot be inherited, and it cannot be automated when you are old. The third alternative is high-density portable value such as gold. It is the historical ticket out of a war zone. It allows for the rapid liquidation of a life and its transport across a border. Its limitation is that it produces nothing. It is a dead asset that carries the risk of physical theft. Anyone who tells you that one of these options is a perfect shield is selling something. Every choice involves a trade-off between mobility and productivity, between safety and growth. This is the forensic reality of the hierarchy. It is not about what they bought, but how they structured their exposure to the inevitable friction of a failing system. No alternative eliminates the risk. They only redistribute it. Think about what that means as we return to the study of Elias one final time. We return to the study of Elias in Berlin. It is now December, and the room is silent. He is no longer reading his bank statements. He is burning them. The fire provides a few minutes of warmth, which is the only real utility those 50,000 marks will ever provide again. From his window, he watches the mechanic neighbor. The man is not standing in a breadline. He is in his yard, trading a sharpened axe and a repaired engine part for a basket of eggs and a bag of flour. The mechanic did not save numbers. He saved tools and the knowledge of how to use them. He understood the hierarchy of utility long before the first mark was printed into oblivion. Elias has finally arrived at the core of the nominal illusion. He realizes that he did not own wealth. He owned a claim on a social contract that the issuer had no intention of honoring. Think about what that means. There is a fundamental difference between access and ownership. Access is a permission granted by an institution. Ownership is a command over physical reality. Access can be revoked by a single administrative decree. Ownership remains until it is physically taken. Convenience and safety are not the same thing. In a stable system, they look identical. In a terminal system, they are opposites. The tragedy of Elias was his belief that the rules of the game were more real than the players. He was a man of the middle class who became a ghost because he trusted the map more than the territory. This channel exists to study the fractures before they become fault lines. We do not offer solutions. We provide a forensic analysis of the mechanisms that govern your survival. Inscribing your attention here is not an